This is Putin's big gambit. Putin is holding on. He's losing the war on a daily basis. The number of troops that are being killed, the equipment that's being destroyed, the territory that's being taken, Putin is losing. But he's ready to throw another 100 or 200,000 bodies, young men, into the battle in the hopes that he can outlast the Ukrainians and wait until November 2024. Imagine that it was the case that Prigozhin survived this. It would be like 10 times more humiliating than it already has been for Prigozhin to have survived the last 60 days since his rebellion.
Bill, we all assume Prigozhin is dead, killed by Putin. Is that your reading of the situation as far as we can tell at this point?
Well, I think there's a 95% probability that Prigozhin is dead, that he's dead at the orders of Vladimir Putin. But there's a very, very small probability that Prigozhin wasn't on that plane. When Prigozhin was first running his rebellion, and the Russian authorities raided his office and raided his home, they found wigs, they found false passports, they found disguises of all sorts. This is a man who's used to subterfuge. He's a killer. He knows how to go after people. He knows how people would be going after him. And so, if he knows that Putin wants to kill him, wouldn't it be the smart thing to do to not be on that plane, but put his name on a manifest? There's also some reports that there was a second Wagner plane flying from St. Petersburg on the same day that landed in Moscow. So I don't want to put too much faith in any conspiracy theories, and I say it's a very, very small probability, but I don't think it's 100% certainty that he's dead, but a very high likelihood that he is.
And what's the level of it's really hard to appreciate the level of sophistication at play here. How much knowledge will Putin have of the likelihood of a success of a hit like this? So, how much will there be a proper investigation to determine whether he was actually on that plane or not? How sophisticated is Prigozhin in terms of pulling the wool over the eyes of an autocratic system like that run by Putin? Russia is famous for its spying capability historically, so presumably they're not that easy to bluff, Russia.
Well, on one hand, they're not that easy to bluff. On the other hand, these are really pretty stupid people for the most part in the security services. These are C students from D universities with no motivation who are doing these types of jobs. We should not ever overestimate Putin's security services, and probably we shouldn't overestimate Prigozhin's ability to survive. These are all very human people. That they're not that clever for the most part, and so I don't want to overstate anything as far as their abilities. But imagine that it was the case that Prigozhin survived this. It would be 10 times more humiliating than it already has been for Prigozhin to have survived the last 60 days since his rebellion. And so, for all intents and purposes, I think we should assume Prigozhin is dead, but there is that small likelihood that he's not.
And if he is dead, let's talk about that then, because that's effectively what we have to work with at the moment. What does it mean, first of all, for Wagner? Because these they're very dominant in African countries. They're less dominant in Ukraine now, but they are the sort of shadow forces of Russia. Does it matter if their boss is dead?
Well, people always ask me for the last 60 days, why is Prigozhin still alive? Yeah. And the assumption that I made was that he was too important to kill because there are 17 countries in Africa. If you look at the map of Africa and you look at where Wagner private military company mercenary operations are headquartered, there's 17 different countries, which doesn't include Syria. There's Libya, there's Venezuela. And so a huge part of Russia's foreign policy is mercenary operations under Wagner. So perhaps over the last 60 days, the Kremlin was coming up with a big contingency plan on how to manage those operations with Prigozhin's death. Who knows? We also don't know. There's a lot of unknowns about what's going to happen next. Is Putin going to go after people down the ranks of the Wagner group? How many of them does he kill? Has he started already? And we haven't heard about it.
Well, is there a number two? Is there a number two? But I was thinking about that. Is there a number two who is the obvious inheritor in all of this?
Well, apparently there is. There's a really scary looking guy named Utkin, who is, I've seen pictures of him today. He was apparently on the plane with Prigozhin. So maybe he's gone too. We don't know. There's one other possibility which we have to think about, which is maybe that Prigozhin thought about this in advance and had some kind of plan for what happens if he's killed. I mean, this is a mercenary operation. What are the survivors going to do next?
Yeah.
If is this the beginning of a massive bloodletting civil war within the different parts of the establishment? No, none of the stuff we know at the moment, and perhaps a lot of the stuff we will never know because we only see 5% of what's going on. 95% of it's going on below the surface.
Yeah. I guess the question is, if Putin did this, and obviously he has a track record of taking planes from the sky, everyone thought Prigozhin was going to be killed, and he has been killed, allegedly. So this all feels very, very plausible. Is this a sign of Putin still being strong, still able to pull the hard man act and get rid of his enemy? Or is this a sign of Putin being weak in that the coup failed, but it got very close and he had to do something and he's been left weaker as a result of it?
Well, my analysis is that the way that Putin has stayed in power over 23 years is by presenting himself as the meanest, nastiest, murderous dictator around. And so that anybody who had any designs on his position or had any disloyalty would be too scared to ever exercise those thoughts. And as a result, everybody stayed in line. That's how he's remained a dictator for such a long period of time. And over the last 60 days, my biggest question was always, how is Putin allowing this guy to challenge him and humiliate him in such a way? I mean, Putin, I have a good friend from the Russian opposition, from the democratic opposition, named Vladimir Kara-Murza, who is sitting in jail for 25 years for giving a CNN and MSNBC interview calling Putin a murderer and a war criminal. And you have a guy who actually ran a real rebellion, who was running around for 2 months. And so that was very humiliating for Putin that happened. And so he needed to change that narrative. He needed to show everybody that actually he is the meanest, nastiest guy around. And by killing Prigozhin, as we have to assume is really the case, he has effectively reestablished that position, and he will particularly have reestablished that situation, that position, if there's more bloodletting to come of other people who are around Prigozhin.
And so, would he ever? He would never admit this in public, though, would he? That it's all a bit. Who would rid me of this turbulent priest? He can't say, can he? Even Putin, even this blood-soaked autocrat, can't go onto Russian television and say, this man challenged me, so I shot the plane out the sky. He's never going to cough to it in public, is he?
Definitely not, but he never has in the past. So you remember Alexander Litvinenko, who was a traitor to Putin. He left Russia, came to London, and then Putin sent 2 assassins to kill Litvinenko with radioactive polonium. This was, I think, in 2006. And of course, Putin never admitted it. He said that had nothing to do with me. Russia had nothing to do with it, et cetera. But this is how he operates. Out of one side of his mouth, he says nothing to do with me, and out of the other side of his mouth, he said this is what happens to traitors. And so it's pure standard Putin operating procedure to do plausibly deniable killings, but make so obvious that of course it was Putin. But in a court of law in Russia, there's not a public statement where he admits it, so that he can sort of brush off any official culpability if he has to do that down the road.
Yeah, he kills with a wink, which is perhaps even more terrifying. Just one final thought for you, Bill, if I might. Overnight, there was also in America, the Republicans were debating. They were debating their presidential candidacy. They were saying, I mean, Trump wasn't there, but he spoke to Tucker Carlson. There's a whole bunch of them debating in Milwaukee. What do you make of? There's clearly a split in the Republican Party about Ukraine. There's clearly a wedge there between some candidates. Probably the most successful candidates are the least likely to support Ukraine. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that this is Putin's big gambit. Putin is holding on. He's losing the war on a daily basis. The number of troops that are being killed, the equipment that's being destroyed, the territory that's being taken, Putin is losing. But he's ready to throw another 100 or 200,000 bodies, young men, into the battle in the hopes that he can outlast the Ukrainians and wait until November 2024. And because there's some reasonable probability that one of these Republicans, Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, Vivek Ramaswamy, gets elected. And if they do, they're all sort of publicly on the record in one way or another saying that they're not going to support Ukraine. And that is a very scary thought for Ukraine. And that's a very, that's basically Putin's Hail Mary pass, hoping that that's how he gets himself out of this mess that he's got himself into.
Yeah.
Why are these Republicans taking that position? It perplexes me to this day. For all of my life, as I've been dealing with American politicians in relation to Russia, the Republican Party historically has been more robust on Russia than the Democrats. But now you have this weird Donald Trump MAGA split, which creates an opening for Putin if that's what comes to pass.
Bill, that's a really interesting analysis. The sort of the idea of waiting for November for Putin. Great to speak to you as ever. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you.